Upon returning from my military deployment, I discovered my grandfather's cabin had been demolished into a pile of splinters and rubble. The HOA president, Vivian Blackthorne, was standing in my driveway, wearing a smug smile and holding a demolition bill for $12,000. She alleged that I owed back fees that had no legal basis. What she was unaware of is that my entire family is employed by the federal government. My father works in FBI white-collar crime. My mother is with IRS criminal investigation. My sister is at the ATF, and I am in military intelligence. The lingering scent of diesel exhaust still hung in the mountain air, mingling with the sweet aroma of crushed cedar logs that had witnessed 4 generations of Christmas mornings and summer fishing trips. Standing in the remnants of our kitchen, I faced the woman who had just committed the most significant error of her corrupt existence. You see, Vivian Blackthorne believed she was leveling the cabin of some defenseless military family. In reality, she had just declared war on a federal task force that convenes for Sunday dinner. What would you do if your family's heritage was destroyed out of sheer malice? Where are you watching from? Please share your location below. Let me rewind 18 months to the beginning of this whole ordeal. My name is Marcus Sterling, I'm 52, and I dedicated 25 years to Army logistics before I wised up and retired to the mountains. My uncle Theodore bequeathed to me this small cabin on what I assumed was merely another scenic lake in Colorado. The old man had always been the family eccentric, living a reclusive life but somehow having money hidden away everywhere. The cabin itself was not impressive. It had 2 bedrooms, a single bathroom, and a kitchen straight out of 1970. But the view was spectacular. Sitting on the back porch with my morning coffee, watching the mist dissipate from the perfectly calm water as loons exchanged calls, was the sound of peace after decades of military turmoil. The lake is shaped like a teardrop, 47 acres of pure mountain water encircled by 12 unassuming homes. These were not lavish residences, just homes for ordinary people seeking quiet retirement spots. At least, that's what I believed before I encountered Karen Whitmore. Karen took up residence 3 houses away approximately 6 months after my arrival. White BMW, gleaming white teeth, and a string of white lies, her entire demeanor conveyed. I am out of place here, but I intend to take control regardless. She is 48, works in real estate, and is married to a local city council aspirant named Derek. Within a fortnight of moving in, she was elected HOA president. It's remarkable how that occurs when you are the sole individual who actually desires the position. The first warning sign should have been her introduction. I was on the dock tinkering with my boat engine. A Chris Craft I had purchased as a derelict and spent 3 years restoring. Every single bolt, plank of mahogany, and chrome accent had been painstakingly rebuilt. She approached in her absurdly high heels, flashed her realtor's smile and remarked, "Oh, you're the military man. Well, I trust you'll appreciate that we uphold certain standards in this community." Certain standards, as if that phrase wasn't saturated with condescension. The boat became her fixation. It was too large, she claimed, and too noisy. It failed to align with the aesthetic she envisioned for our lakeside community. It didn't matter that half the other docks harbored boats of a similar size. It didn't matter that mine was arguably the most magnificent vessel on the lake. Karen had identified me as the problem, and Karen was accustomed to getting her way. The scent of her perfume, an expensive fragrance that likely cost more than my monthly food budget, lingered on the dock long after she departed, mingled with the genuine aroma of cedar shingles warming in the morning sun and the creosote from old dock pilings. It felt like an intrusion, as if someone had sprayed artificial flowers in a natural garden. That initial violation notice was delivered on a Tuesday. It was on crisp white paper with an official HOA letterhead, filled with enough legal-sounding jargon to frighten anyone who didn't have a better understanding. Oversized recreational vessel violates community aesthetic standards per Covenant 14, 7B, $200 daily until removed. The thing about military training is that it instills in you the practice of gathering intelligence before taking action. So, rather than becoming enraged, I grew inquisitive. Who was this woman who presumed she could dictate terms to a retired Army officer on his own land? And, more critically, what was I unaware of concerning Uncle Theodore's small gift that could potentially alter the entire situation? Because if 25 years in logistics taught me anything, it's that the individual with the superior information is almost always the victor, and I had a feeling that Karen hadn't done her research nearly as thoroughly as she believed. Vivian's first significant power play occurred while my boots were still caked with German mud. She convened what she termed an emergency HOA meeting on a Wednesday at 2 p.m., a time when most working individuals are, in fact, at work. It's peculiar how these emergencies always seem to arise when the people being targeted are unable to appear and defend themselves. During this small assembly of 7 individuals in her living room, because that's how democracy operates in Vivian's realm, she pushed through a measure called a special assessment resolution. Our cabin was now officially classified as being in architectural noncompliance with community standards that were non-existent when my grandfather constructed the home. But this is where Vivian demonstrated her true prowess in bureaucratic conflict. She compiled a 47-page violation report. I am not exaggerating. 47 pages for a modest family cabin. Our dock was deemed excessively large at 12 feet by 8 feet. Our native wildflower garden was categorized as unapproved landscaping that disrupts neighborhood aesthetics. The fire pit my grandfather built for roasting marshmallows was labeled an unregistered combustible hazard, presenting a clear and present danger to community safety. The woman had managed to transform a family sanctuary into a federal disaster area on paper, complete with backdated documents to create the illusion that we had been disregarding violation notices for months. While I was analyzing enemy communications abroad, Vivian was fabricating evidence with the skill of a seasoned intelligence operative. When I finally came home from my deployment, a stack of legal documents awaited me on my doorstep, thick enough to deflect shrapnel. The scent of mold had already begun to seep through the cabin's windows after months of enforced inattention. It was that sour, musty smell that signals something is decaying within walls that once smelled of pine and family meals. That's when my training took over in military intelligence. Every problem is treated as an enemy operation. You map the key players, pinpoint their motives, track their communications, and identify their vulnerabilities. So, I cleared off the kitchen table and began constructing a threat assessment board, just as I had done with Taliban networks in Afghanistan. I presented our case to military legal aid, and Captain Rodriguez nearly choked on her coffee as she examined Vivian's documents. "Sergeant Garrison," she said, "this is a textbook violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. They cannot move forward with enforcement actions against deployed personnel without adhering to federal notification protocols." It was then that I discovered something vital. There are specific laws designed to shield military families from this very type of bureaucratic ambush while we are serving overseas. However, the true shock emerged when I reached out to our property management company. My parents had engaged them to manage basic upkeep during my deployment, but they had inexplicably ceased all services 3 months prior. The manager eventually confessed the truth. Vivian had threatened their contractor's license if they did not abandon our property. She had weaponized her connections in the construction industry to isolate us economically. A siege conducted with building permits. So, I delved deeper, employing the same methodical approach I used to map enemy networks. Public records, corporate filings, financial disclosures, all forms of perfectly legal intelligence gathering, and they're buried within the Secretary of State database. I struck gold. The HOA's corporate registration had lapsed 8 months ago. They possessed zero legal authority for enforcement. Vivian had been operating a phantom organization, akin to discovering your adversary forgot to actually assemble an army. The irony was exquisite. While Vivian fancied herself clever, her BMW continued to pass by our property at surveillance-like hours. 2:00 a.m., 5:30 a.m. Random weekday afternoons, the sound of that German engine became my daily reminder that she was more concerned about us than we needed to be about her. It was amateur-hour surveillance from someone playing intelligence games with an actual intelligence professional. Meanwhile, neighbors began to share their own horror stories in hushed tones. The owner of the hardware store revealed that certain customers were mysteriously finding themselves unable to procure construction supplies. 3 other lakefront families were enduring identical campaigns of harassment, featuring the same fabricated violations, the same bureaucratic timing, and the same intimidation methods. You could sense the tension in the community, that charged anticipation when people realize someone is finally going to challenge the neighborhood despot. It brought to mind those moments preceding a mission, when everyone knows the operation is about to go active. As I walked our property line with a measuring tape and camera, the crunch of frost-covered gravel under my boots felt like preparation for a battle, because that is precisely what it was. Vivian had waged war on my family while I was serving my country abroad. What she failed to grasp was that she had just provided a military intelligence analyst with the perfect case study in domestic threat assessment. Every document she had falsified, every procedural shortcut she had employed, every illicit coordination with contractors. It was all now evidence. Cataloged with the same precision I had used to monitor insurgent networks, the woman believed she was bulldozing a helpless military family's cabin. Instead, she had given a federal employee a masterclass in the actual mechanics of local corruption. 2 weeks later, Vivian escalated her tactics to what I can only term full-scale psychological warfare. She lodged a public safety complaint with the county, alleging that our dock presented an imminent drowning risk to the community's children. Bear in mind, this is the very same 12 by 8-foot dock where 3 generations of Garrison children learned to swim without a single mishap. But here is where her timing becomes particularly noteworthy. She arranged for the county inspection at 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, precisely when typical working families would be at their jobs. A complete coincidence. I'm certain the inspector was a man named Dale Henricks in his mid-50s, the type who drives a lifted truck adorned with truck nuts and addresses everyone as buddy, in a tone that implies the exact opposite. What I was unaware of then, but my ATF sister Mackenzie would later uncover, was that Dale had been flagged in federal databases for taking kickbacks from contractors. The man had a knack for discovering structural issues that necessitated costly repairs from his associates in the construction industry. Much like a medical examiner who only identifies causes of death that benefit the funeral home that covers his golf membership, I had installed trail cameras around the property. A perfectly legal practice on one's own land and a habit acquired after spending 18 months watching for insurgent activity. The resulting footage was more compelling than any Netflix thriller. It captured Vivian and Dale on our dock 3 days before the surprise inspection, taking measurements, photographing, and engaging in what appeared to be a highly detailed discussion about structural integrity, the scent of his cheap cologne blending with the lake water would have been amusing if it weren't so transparently criminal. In intelligence work, you learn to pick up on these details. When individuals are attempting to appear official while engaged in something utterly corrupt, their giveaways become glaringly obvious. During the official inspection, Dale devoted precisely 4 minutes to examining our dock before pronouncing it structurally compromised and dangerous to public safety. His report asserted that the support posts exhibited advanced deterioration and imminent collapse risk. The amusing thing about that was the dock had been professionally inspected and certified just 6 months prior by a licensed marine contractor. Yet Dale's account made it seem as though we had constructed a death trap from toothpicks and hope. That evening, I convened a family council of war. It was the first time we had all been in the same room since my deployment, and the dining room crackled with a palpable, focused anger. Dad contributed his FBI case files methodology. Mom brought her IRS financial forensics perspective. Mackenzie arrived equipped with ATF database access and a very specific set of skills for investigating individuals who abuse their official power. This is textbook racketeering, Dad stated, spreading Dale's inspection report across the table. Utilizing official procedures for personal financial gain, coordinated with multiple parties, we're potentially looking at federal RICO violations if we can establish a pattern. Mom was already accessing property tax records on her laptop. Vivian has been classifying adjacent properties as abandoned or condemned to lower her own tax assessments. She is literally profiting from the harassment of her neighbors. That's when I learned something that would have been valuable earlier. When local officials invent property issues, they often manipulate tax assessments for their own financial benefit. But Mackenzie delivered the true bombshell. She had run Dale's name through ATF databases and discovered something magnificent. He had been implicated in a 2019 bridge collapse that resulted in 2 fatalities. His inspection license should have been permanently revoked, yet he was somehow still operating illegally, the man tasked with conducting safety inspections was himself a safety liability who had already caused deaths. Emergency inspections necessitate specific statutory authority under Montana law. Mackenzie clarified while printing out database records, most HOA emergencies are not, in fact, legal emergencies. They are simply fabricated urgencies designed to circumvent proper procedures. The following morning, Vivian arrived with a construction crew, asserting she had the authority to immediately secure the hazardous dock for public safety. Imagine this. 5 men armed with chainsaws and sledgehammers, prepared to destroy property without a warrant, all based on an inspection carried out by an unlicensed fraud who had already killed people with his incompetence. This is where military training proves highly valuable in civilian situations. I stepped onto that dock, the supposedly dangerous, structurally compromised dock, and calmly notified them that they were trespassing on private property without legal authorization. Everything was recorded. Everyone remained polite. Yet my stance was absolutely unwavering. "Ma'am," I said to Vivian, "you are welcome to contact the sheriff if you are convinced you have legal authority here. I will wait." The expression on her face was priceless, like someone who has just realized their bluff has been challenged by a person who actually understands the regulations. The tension in the air was palpable, crackling like electricity before a storm. Her construction crew glanced around uneasily, likely contemplating whether demolishing property based on fraudulent inspection reports was worth their hourly pay. The sound of the chainsaws falling silent was more gratifying than any victory anthem. It was at that moment I knew we had her cornered. Vivian had progressed from paperwork harassment to attempted property destruction founded on fabricated evidence. She had just handed us enough federal crimes to occupy prosecutors for months. 3 weeks later, Vivian went completely nuclear, armed with Dale's fraudulent inspection report. She somehow persuaded the county to issue an actual demolition order, our family cabin. A structure built to last another century, holding 4 decades of memories, was now officially condemned as an imminent threat to public safety and property values. But here's the thing about Vivian's psychological warfare. She possessed a true gift for timing. The demolition was set for the Friday after Thanksgiving. You know, that ideal moment when families are digesting turkey and no one is paying attention to local government affairs. Maximum emotional distress, minimum community observation. We were all at the cabin for what we expected to be a typical Thanksgiving gathering. The aroma of my mom's sage stuffing blended with the scent of pine smoke from the fireplace. For generations of garrison men were debating football while the women rolled their eyes and made the significant decisions. It was normal family chaos, the kind that makes you feel grateful for the people who drive you crazy. That's when Sheriff's Deputy Martinez appeared at our door, hat in his hands, looking like a man who would rather be anywhere else in the world. "Ma'am, sir, I'm truly sorry about this, but I have to serve you with a 48-hour evacuation notice." He passed over the documents with the expression of someone being compelled to kick puppies for a living. Deputy Martinez had served in Iraq. You can always recognize it, and he knew military bearing when he encountered it. "Look, Sergeant," he said in a low voice. "Something about this whole situation smells fishy, but I am legally bound to serve these papers. You all might want to get a lawyer quickly." Here is what I discovered about emergency demolition orders. Under Montana law, they are supposed to require a minimum of 10 days' notice, with specific judicial review for properties that present a genuine public danger. But Vivian had somehow convinced a county judge that our cabin posed such an immediate peril that standard legal protections were inapplicable. I immediately contacted military legal aid, treating this as the hostile action it was. Captain Rodriguez was incensed when she heard the timeline. "Sergeant, this contravenes about 15 different due process requirements. Emergency demolitions demand documented, imminent danger, not just some inspector's opinion on dock safety." While I was coordinating our legal counterattack, my family activated like the federal task force we had inadvertently become. Dad reached out to his FBI contacts regarding civil rights violations under color of law, when local officials misuse their authority to strip citizens of their constitutional rights. It escalates to a federal crime. Mom initiated an IRS investigation into Vivian's construction business, because nothing screams conflict of interest like employing your own company to demolish a property you've been harassing. Mackenzie coordinated with the sheriff's department concerning Dale's illicit inspection activities. It turned out that 3 other counties had been questioning why their certified inspector consistently found problems that required his friend's construction services to resolve. But the true breakthrough occurred when my mom's IRS training unearthed something magnificent in the property tax records. Vivian had been declaring our cabin as abandoned and condemned on her own tax filings for the preceding 2 years, thereby lowering her adjacent property assessments by asserting diminished neighborhood values. She had been literally profiting from harassing us even before she commenced the demolition process. "She has been orchestrating this for years," Mom declared, spreading financial documents across the kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. "Every act of harassment, every fabricated violation, it has all been a build-up to seizing this property for her own benefit." Then we found the smoking gun. Vivian's construction business had been pre-selected to manage the demolition. She had contracted herself to destroy our property, based on fraudulent inspections performed by an unlicensed inspector who was indebted to her. It was like finding out the arsonist also owned the fire insurance company. That evening, As we frantically drafted legal injunctions and federal complaints, Vivian convened an emergency HOA meeting to celebrate what she termed the successful resolution of community safety concerns. The woman actually invited local media to chronicle her responsible leadership in safeguarding neighborhood property values. The sound of her victory speech, broadcast on local radio while we were packing up. Family heirlooms had a particular quality that reminded me of enemy propaganda. Confident falsehoods delivered with absolute certainty. She promised the lakefront would be restored to its natural beauty once the non-compliant structure was gone. A translation for her personal expansion agenda, but Vivian made one critical error in her moment of triumph. She publicly admitted to orchestrating the entire harassment campaign, on the record with media present, all while federal agents were compiling a case file that already included racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The taste of adrenaline during that 72-hour legal marathon felt familiar, the same metallic urgency I had experienced before combat operations overseas, except this time, the enemy had just broadcasted their entire battle strategy on live radio while standing in a minefield of federal crimes. By Monday morning, our emergency injunction had been filed, federal investigations were officially underway, and Vivian Blackthorne was oblivious to the fact that she had just declared war on the entire United States government. The woman thought she was demolishing a cabin. Instead, she had constructed her own prison from documented federal offenses. Mom's IRS training in financial crimes investigation proved to be the element that unlocked the entire situation. While Dad was constructing federal cases and Mackenzie was liaising with law enforcement, Cordelia Garrison was engaged in what she does best: tracing the money trail that criminals invariably believe they have concealed sufficiently. "Dex, you have to look at this," she said, summoning me to her laptop at 2 a.m. The dining room table resembled a command post, strewn with printouts, tax forms, and corporate documents. The aroma of strong coffee and the glow from multiple computer screens lent the scene a war room ambience. What she had discovered was beautiful in its elegance and utterly damning in its implications, concealed within a labyrinth of shell companies and legal entities. Vivian had acquired 12 acres of prime lakefront property in 2019, directly adjacent to our cabin. The land was purchased through an entity named Serenity Development LLC, with Vivian designated as the managing partner, but here is the crucial detail. The development permits she had submitted to the county outlined a $2.3 million luxury glamping resort. You know, those high-end camping experiences for wealthy individuals who want to rough it with Wi-Fi and room service. However, the permit explicitly stated that development was conditional upon the removal of all non-conforming structures from neighboring properties. Our cabin was not merely an annoyance to Vivian. It was a literal obstruction on her path to becoming a multimillionaire. Mom continued her investigation, and the pattern became unmistakably clear. 5 other lakefront families had been subjected to identical harassment campaigns over the previous 2 years. The same fabricated violations, the same inspector, the same escalating pressure tactics. But what elevated this to a federal crime was that Vivian had been leveraging her HOA authority to artificially generate property issues, then making offers to purchase the problematic properties at prices significantly below market value. "This is classic racketeering," Mom stated, highlighting financial transactions on her screen. "She is systematically using official processes to deprive people of their property rights for personal enrichment. The FBI has an entire manual dedicated to this type of scheme." The truly remarkable part was how Vivian had documented everything herself. Her construction business tax returns revealed $340,000 in questionable consultation fees paid to various county officials over the past 3 years. Remember Dale, our fraudulent inspector? He had been receiving monthly payments disguised as structural assessment retainers. But the story gets even better. Vivian's brother-in-law happened to be the president of First Mountain Bank, the very bank that had pre-approved a $2.3 million construction loan for Serenity Development LLC. The entire operation was a family enterprise designed to steal lakefront property by exploiting governmental authority. We had exposed what federal prosecutors term a criminal enterprise: multiple individuals using their official capacities in a coordinated plot to commit crimes for financial gain. The HOA harassment was not personal. It was simply the retail component of a much larger wholesale theft operation. "Look at this timeline," Dad said, linking the dots between property acquisitions, HOA harassment campaigns, and bank loan approvals. "She has been planning this for a minimum of 4 years, every family." She has targeted owns land that obstructs her development plans. That's when it dawned on me why my military intelligence training had been so effective in this fight. Vivian was not just a corrupt HOA president. She was managing a sophisticated criminal conspiracy that necessitated mapping networks, tracking financial flows, and comprehending how multiple malevolent actors coordinate their efforts. The power dynamic had undergone a complete reversal. 24 hours earlier, we were a military family attempting to protect our cabin from bureaucratic harassment. Now, we were in possession of evidence detailing a multi-million-dollar federal crime syndicate that had been systematically dispossessing American families of their property for years. Vivian believed she was bulldozing our cabin to make way for her resort. What she had actually done was provide federal law enforcement agencies with a comprehensive roadmap to her entire criminal operation, all documented in her own tax returns and corporate filings. The woman had been so self-assured in her local political connections that she had overlooked something crucial. When you commit crimes against federal employees, those crimes are investigated by federal agencies whose resources far exceed the reach of local corruption. By Tuesday morning, we were no longer just fighting for our cabin. We were sitting on enough evidence to dismantle an entire criminal enterprise masquerading as community governance. By Wednesday morning, our family dining room had morphed into something akin to a federal command center. Military-grade organizational charts adorned the walls, evidence timelines were mapped out on whiteboards, and 4 distinct government agencies were coordinating the takedown of what we now understood to be a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The smell of industrial-strength coffee mingled with the incessant hum of laser printers as we assembled what Dad described as the most meticulously documented local corruption case he had encountered in his 28 years with the FBI. Each family member had assumed the lead in their respective area of expertise. Observing us collaborate was like watching a precision instrument engineered specifically for dismantling criminal conspiracies. Franklin took the lead on the federal prosecution strategy. We're no longer just dealing with HOA harassment, he explained, organizing evidence into prosecution-ready files. This encompasses every major federal crime category: conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering through the construction business. His FBI contacts in the public corruption unit were practically drooling over the case. When local officials systematically abuse their power for personal gain, particularly when targeting military families, it becomes precisely the kind of federal crime that prosecutors are eager to showcase. The FBI manual has a chapter dedicated to this type of scheme, and Vivian had followed it as if it were a script. Mom's expertise from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division translated into financial warfare capabilities that would make any adversary anxious. She had pinpointed every bank account, property, vehicle, and asset linked to the conspiracy. When we conclude the asset forfeiture process, she remarked with the satisfaction of someone who had dedicated decades to pursuing tax evaders, Vivian is going to wish she had never heard the word lakefront. The truly elegant aspect was how her own avarice had created the paper trail, every bribe disguised as a consultation fee, every shell company transaction, every fraudulent expense claim. It was all documented in tax filings she had signed under penalty of perjury. The Criminal Investigation Division has software capable of reconstructing financial crimes going back a decade, Mom noted, and Vivian has been conveniently generating digital evidence the whole time. Mackenzie orchestrated the multi-agency law enforcement response with the precision of someone who had spent years investigating explosives conspiracies. Dale's fraudulent inspections don't just violate state licensing regulations, she explained while coordinating with sheriff's departments across 3 counties. When he falsifies structural safety reports for demolitions, he is potentially violating federal explosives regulations. Every building he has condemned based on falsified inspections becomes a federal crime scene. Her ATF database inquiries had revealed that Dale's pattern of inspection fraud extended across multiple states. The man had been systematically falsifying safety reports for profit, and at least 2 people had died in that 2019 bridge collapse he had certified as structurally sound. Federal prosecutors were already drafting charges that could imprison him for decades. My role evolved into what military intelligence excels at: comprehensive threat assessment and strategic coordination. I constructed detailed operational timelines, mapped communication networks among the conspirators, and developed what is known as pattern analysis, illustrating how each individual crime connected to the larger criminal enterprise. But what made this family operation truly potent was the legitimate federal authority supporting every action. When Dad's FBI team sought surveillance authorization, judges granted it without delay. When Mom's IRS division initiated asset investigations, banks cooperated readily. When Mackenzie's ATF contacts liaised with local law enforcement, sheriff's departments treated it as the high-priority federal case it had become. Within a week, we had established a community intelligence network that would have impressed any military commander. The retired Marine who edited the local paper became our media liaison. The Navy veteran who owned the surveying company offered technical expertise and detailed property evaluations. 5 targeted families transformed into cooperating federal witnesses, each providing evidence of Vivian's systematic harassment campaigns. Even the hardware store owner, a Vietnam veteran who had been quietly recording which customers were being refused building supplies, turned out to have been compiling an intelligence file for 3 years. "I knew something was off," he said, handing over detailed records of Vivian's economic coercion tactics. "I just didn't know who to report it to until now." The technological arsenal we brought together would have been formidable in any federal investigation. Professional surveillance equipment, financial analysis software, legal research databases, and military planning applications repurposed for civilian use. But the true force multiplier was having 4 family members who knew precisely which federal resources to mobilize and how to coordinate among agencies that often struggle with communication. By the end of the second week, we were no longer merely investigating Vivian's crimes. We were documenting a complete criminal enterprise with sufficient evidence to support federal charges against a dozen co-conspirators. The woman who believed she was confronting a single, helpless military family had inadvertently declared war on a federal task force endowed with limitless jurisdiction and resources. The taste of inevitable victory was starting to blend with the coffee. Vivian had no idea that her entire criminal operation was now under federal surveillance, with every phone call monitored and every financial transaction scrutinized. By the 3rd week of our investigation, Vivian must have felt the net tightening. Federal agents had been conducting routine inquiries at banks, courthouses, and construction sites. Her phone calls were being monitored, her financial activities tracked, and her associates were becoming anxious. It was then that she made the classic blunder that every criminal makes when panic sets in. She resorted to direct action. It began with what she likely considered subtle sabotage, maintenance. Contractors started appearing at our cabin at unusual hours, asserting they needed to conduct routine utility inspections. Except these were not utility workers. They were men equipped with tools designed for demolition, not maintenance. Our electrical lines were mysteriously severed, the water pump experienced sudden mechanical failures, and the septic system somehow incurred puncture damage that bore a suspicious resemblance to sledgehammer impacts. The wonderful thing about military intelligence training is that you learn to foresee enemy escalation patterns. I had deployed trail cameras around the entire property perimeter, capturing everything in high-definition detail. The footage was more compelling than any crime documentary. Vivian's contractors systematically destroying our infrastructure while she observed from her BMW, directing the operation like a general orchestrating battlefield sabotage. You could sense the desperation in their rushed work, that distinct scent of fear-induced sweat mixed with diesel fuel and freshly cut copper wiring. These were not seasoned criminals. They were construction workers who had been promised easy money for minor property modifications and were beginning to grasp that they had been enlisted for federal offenses. But Vivian's true error was attempting to intimidate federal employees. She began dispatching anonymous letters to our workplace security offices, asserting that we presented potential security risks due to unstable behavior and abuse of government connections. The woman actually tried to initiate military security clearance reviews and FBI internal investigations by disseminating rumors about the very people investigating her crimes. That's when the situation became personal for my family, in ways Vivian could not have foreseen. Threatening federal employees not only contravenes additional statutes but also triggers counterintelligence protocols designed to safeguard national security assets. Within 48 hours, FBI counterintelligence was treating Vivian's harassment campaign as a potential threat to federal operations. Dad's response was particularly gratifying to witness. She just escalated from local corruption to threatening federal agents. He remarked while coordinating with his FBI colleagues. That's the kind of mistake that elevates a 5-year sentence to a 20-year sentence. Meanwhile, Vivian was organizing what she termed a community safety meeting to portray herself as the victim of government overreach. She circulated stories about how the unstable veteran family was exploiting federal connections to intimidate honest community leaders. The irony was exquisite. A criminal conspiracy complaining about law enforcement investigating their crimes. Her media manipulation efforts included placing stories in regional newspapers about federal overreach and local governance. She even retained a public relations firm to construct a narrative about courageous community leaders resisting government bullying. The woman was spending thousands of dollars to publicly document her obstruction of federal investigations. But this is where her amateurish approach to criminal conspiracy truly became apparent. She attempted to coordinate her smear campaign using the very phones and email accounts that were under federal surveillance. Every strategy session, every coordinated falsehood, every attempt to sway public opinion was being recorded by the same agencies she was trying to undermine. The escalation peaked in desperation when she attempted to directly bribe federal investigators. Vivian apparently believed she could approach one of my dad's FBI colleagues at a coffee shop and offer $25,000 to misplace some paperwork related to our case. She actually presented an envelope full of cash to an active federal agent who was wearing a wire that captured the entire exchange. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempting to bribe a federal officer," Agent Rodriguez stated, and you could practically hear Vivian's world crumbling in real time. Even better, the arrest was orchestrated to occur in full view of the coffee shop, where half the county's mourning patrons witnessed their HOA president being led away in handcuffs. That very day, Dale, the fraudulent inspector, was apprehended while attempting to flee the state. It turns out that when ATF agents are looking for someone, state borders offer little refuge. Mackenzie's coordination with multiple law enforcement agencies ensured that Dale's escape attempt transformed into a federal manhunt that concluded with him face down in a Walmart parking lot in Wyoming. The sound of those handcuffs clicking shut, broadcast on local news and shared across social media, signaled the moment Vivian's criminal enterprise officially imploded. Her construction business assets were seized, her bank accounts were frozen, and her co-conspirators were all vying to see who could cooperate with federal prosecutors the quickest. The scent of victory mingled with the mountain air that evening as we sat on our supposedly structurally dangerous dock. Watching news helicopters circle above, Vivian had spent years terrorizing families with bureaucratic warfare, but she had never encountered anyone who knew how to retaliate with the full might of the federal government. With Dale in custody and her bribery attempt on federal record, Vivian descended into a full-blown panic. This is when criminals invariably make their worst decisions, when they realize the investigation will not simply disappear, so they begin to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. What she failed to comprehend is that obstructing justice during an active federal investigation is like pouring gasoline on a fire you are already failing to control, the first indication of her desperation. Manifested at 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Vivian's construction company office mysteriously burst into flames. A pure coincidence, naturally, that the fire happened to consume filing cabinets that held financial records, contract documentation, and communication logs with county officials. The fire department discovered accelerant residue and what appeared to be sledgehammer damage to computer hard drives before the fire even took hold. But here's the beautiful thing about attempting to destroy evidence in the digital era. Everything has backups, and federal investigators know precisely where to locate them. Mom's IRS Criminal Investigation Division had already subpoenaed bank records, email servers, and cloud storage accounts. Vivian was destroying her own copies of evidence that prosecutors already possessed in multiple formats. "She's making this simpler for us," Mom chuckled while examining the arson report. "Now we can add obstruction of justice and insurance fraud charges to the racketeering indictment. The woman is literally committing new federal crimes to conceal the old ones." The truly desperate act occurred when Vivian began threatening the other families who had been cooperating with federal investigators. Anonymous letters started appearing in mailboxes, warning that continued cooperation with outside agitators will have consequences for community standing and business relationships. She was, in essence, threatening federal witnesses in writing, which is as intelligent as leaving your fingerprints on a murder weapon. But Vivian's masterpiece of criminal folly was staging a break-in at her own residence. She summoned sheriff's deputies to report that the military family had burglarized her house and planted threatening materials, including what she alleged were military equipment and government surveillance devices that proved we were misusing federal authority for a personal vendetta. The only issue with Vivian's false flag operation was that my military intelligence training makes one exceptionally proficient at identifying fabricated evidence. When I reviewed the police report, it read like a checklist of amateur errors. Brand new threatening notes printed on paper that still bore store creases, military equipment that was actually civilian camping gear available at Walmart, and surveillance devices that were smoke detectors with their labels peeled off. Deputy Martinez, the Iraq veteran who had served our initial demolition papers, took one look at the scene and immediately contacted federal investigators. "This is the most poorly staged crime scene I have ever witnessed," he informed Dad's FBI team. "She planted evidence so obvious that my child could have spotted it from the backyard." Meanwhile, Dale's arrest had set off a chain reaction of confessions from other co-conspirators. The county commissioner, who had taken Vivian's bribes, decided he preferred cooperation over facing federal prison. The bank president, Vivian's brother-in-law, suddenly recalled detailed conversations about coordinating loans with property harassment campaigns. Even the construction workers who had vandalized our cabin were lining up to offer evidence in exchange for lighter sentences. That's when Vivian made her final, fatal mistake. She attempted to flee, not in a physical sense. She was too cunning for that. Instead, she tried to move assets into offshore accounts, liquidate properties, and establish new shell companies to conceal her remaining funds. Every transaction was monitored by federal agencies that specialize in tracking financial crimes. "She's like a wounded animal thrashing in a trap," Mackenzie noted while coordinating with ATF financial crime specialists. "Every move she makes generates more evidence and draws in more federal agencies. At this stage, she has violations falling under the jurisdiction of the FBI, ATF, IRS, Treasury, and probably Homeland Security." The surveillance footage from this time frame depicts a woman completely unraveling under the strain. Vivian's BMW was seen at various banks, law offices, and government buildings at odd hours as she desperately sought anyone who could make her federal problems vanish. The irony was that every meeting was being monitored, every conversation recorded, and every financial transaction tracked in real time. Her final desperate maneuver was an attempt to bribe a federal judge through an intermediary. She apparently thought that if she could get the right person to talk sense to the federal court managing our case, the entire investigation would simply evaporate. The intermediary she selected was a former law school classmate who happened to be a federal prosecutor in another district. The phone call lasted precisely 43 seconds before the prosecutor terminated the call and immediately informed federal authorities about the attempted judicial bribery. Within hours, Vivian had added conspiracy to obstruct justice and attempted bribery of federal officials to her expanding list of charges. By Friday evening, as I sat on our supposedly dangerous dock with a beer, watching federal surveillance helicopters circle overhead, I had a beautiful realization: Vivian had committed more federal crimes trying to conceal her original offenses than she had in the initial conspiracy itself. The woman had constructed her own federal prison, one felony at a time. The annual Lake Serenity Community Safety Meeting was intended to be Vivian's moment of triumph. She had arranged it for Saturday morning at the community center, complete with local media presence and what she billed as a special recognition ceremony for outstanding community leadership. 200 residents filled the hall, anticipating the usual dull HOA business about snow plowing and boat dock rules. What they received instead was the most dramatic public implosion in the history of Montana local government. Vivian was unaware that every federal agency investigating her had collaborated to make this the grand finale of their case. FBI agents were interspersed throughout the audience, appearing as concerned residents. ATF investigators occupied the back row with video cameras. IRS criminal investigation agents were stationed at strategic points near the exits. Even the U.S. Attorney's Office had dispatched prosecutors to observe what they knew would be Vivian's last public appearance as a free woman. The Garrison family made our entrance together, with me in my full dress uniform at the front. The community's response was swift and potent. Applause that began with the veterans present and quickly spread through the entire room. You could feel the atmosphere shift as people understood this was no longer going to be Vivian's event. But Vivian continued to play her part as the misunderstood community advocate. She approached the podium with that self-assured smile she had honed over 3 terms as HOA president and launched into what she evidently believed would be her vindication speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to speak about the recent unpleasantness caused by certain individuals who have opted to use their government connections to intimidate and harass dedicated community volunteers." She started, looking directly at our family. I have always held that Lake Serenity should be a place where honest, hard-working families can chase the American dream without interference from outside agitators. The crowd grew restless, with murmurs spreading as neighbors who had been targeted by Vivian's schemes recognized the falsehoods being presented as public service. She doubled down, taking credit for eliminating safety hazards and non-compliant structures that endangered property values and family safety. It was then that I requested permission to speak to the community as a concerned military family. The room fell silent as I connected my laptop to the projection system and started showing surveillance footage of Vivian's contractors systematically sabotaging our property. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is documented evidence of a criminal conspiracy, captured over the last month of a federal investigation, I declared. The room erupted as people saw Vivian's hired hands cutting electrical lines, damaging water systems, and destroying property, all while she directed the operation from her BMW. Dad then stood up and introduced himself as FBI Special Agent Franklin Garrison. The authority in his voice sliced through the crowd's noise like a razor. I am here to inform this community that the federal investigation into systematic civil rights violations, racketeering, and public corruption has led to multiple federal indictments. But the true showstopper was when Dale, the inspector, was led into the room in handcuffs, flanked by ATF agents. The crowd gasped as they realized the man who had condemned their neighbors' properties as safety risks was himself a federal fugitive who had been falsifying inspection reports for personal gain. She paid me to fake safety reports on properties she wanted to acquire, Dale announced to the packed hall, his voice cracking under the weight of his confession. Every violation, every condemnation order, every emergency demolition. It was all orchestrated to steal lakefront property for her development project. At that moment, Vivian's composure finally shattered. She began to yell about government overreach and the persecution of honest citizens. But her voice was lost in the crowd's reaction as they grasped the full extent of the conspiracy that had been plaguing their community for years. Mom took the floor next, presenting her IRS findings with the precision of a financial forensics expert. The defendant used her construction business to launder bribes, evade taxes on $340,000 in unreported income, and systematically defraud the federal government while harassing military families. 5 other targeted families stood up to share their experiences with identical harassment campaigns. Business owners recounted economic intimidation, and the hardware store owner presented 3 years of records detailing how Vivian had weaponized access to building supplies to coerce her neighbors. The atmosphere in the room was charged with the kind of justice that people seldom witness firsthand. This was no longer just about our cabin. It was about an entire community realizing that the person they had entrusted with power had been systematically abusing that trust for personal profit. Vivian made one final, desperate attempt to regain control. This is a vendetta by federal employees who cannot accept legitimate community governance, she screamed. But her words were swallowed by the sound of handcuffs clicking as FBI agents closed in for the arrest. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," Agent Rodriguez announced, and the entire room fell silent to hear the Miranda rights being read to their former HOA president. As they led Vivian away in handcuffs, with news cameras documenting every second, I delivered the line I had been rehearsing for months. "Ma'am, you demolished our family cabin, believing we were just another powerless military family. You forgot that we swore an oath to defend this Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today, justice comes home." 6 months later, Vivian Blackthorne was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. The sound of the gavel striking echoed through a crowded courtroom, where half of Lake Serenity had gathered to see justice served. Dale received 18 months and had all his professional licenses permanently revoked. The county commissioner resigned in disgrace after pleading guilty to accepting bribes. But the true victory was not just about incarcerating criminals. It was about witnessing an entire community recover from years of systematic abuse disguised as governance. The civil lawsuit settlement provided full compensation for our demolished cabin, along with punitive damages that sent an unequivocal message about the consequences of weaponizing bureaucracy against American families. Every targeted family received substantial restitution. More importantly, we had set a legal precedent that HOA harassment of military families would be prosecuted as a federal civil rights violation. The new cabin we constructed stands on the same foundation where my grandfather's hands first forged our family legacy. But it is larger and superior to the original. It features modern safety systems, accessibility enhancements, and a wraparound porch large enough to accommodate 3 generations of garrisons for Sunday dinners. The aroma of fresh cedar and the lake breeze, mingled with the scent of my mom's famous chocolate chip cookies, has supplanted the diesel exhaust and fear that once contaminated this place. But the best part is seeing community children cannonballing off our dock on summer afternoons. Their shouts of delight blend with the calls of loons across water that mirrors nothing but blue sky and endless possibility. This is what lakefront property is meant for: bringing families together, not tearing them apart through manufactured legal battles. Lake Serenity completely disbanded the old HOA and formed a new community organization with stringent transparency requirements, term limits, and accountability protocols. The Montana legislature enacted the Service Members HOA Protection Act, establishing statewide legal safeguards based on our family's struggle. Sometimes one family's determination can spark change that protects thousands of others. The Lake Serenity Veteran Scholarship Fund, which we founded, has become our most cherished legacy. Each year, we grant college scholarships to military families who have encountered legal battles while serving their country. The annual fundraising fishing tournament has evolved into the community's premier celebration, where the taste of freshly caught bass is complemented by the satisfaction of neighbors who learned to support one another. Federal agencies have established an HOA abuse task force specifically to investigate similar cases, and our story has sparked reform movements in 23 states. The documentary When David Has a Federal Badge transformed our family's ordeal into a national dialogue about defending Americans from petty tyrants who conceal themselves behind official titles. Here is what every homeowner should remember. Always confirm an HOA's legal status through your Secretary of State's database. Expired organizations cannot legally enforce rules, but they will persist until someone challenges them. Document everything with timestamps when encountering suspicious official conduct, because proving a conspiracy requires evidence of coordination. Most importantly, when local officials abuse their power for personal gain, it becomes a federal crime with severe repercussions. The system has mechanisms to protect citizens from corruption. You just need to know which federal agencies to approach and have the courage to stand up to bullies who believe their positions make them invincible. Next week, I will share the story of my sister Mackenzie's case, which involved a corrupt sheriff who made the fatal error of threatening a federal explosives investigator. That story makes our HOA fight seem like a preliminary exercise for what occurs when you genuinely provoke the federal bear. But first, I want to hear your stories. Please share your HOA nightmare experiences in the comments below. We read every single one, and some of them evolve into federal cases when families become aware of their rights. Have you contended with power-hungry board members who act as if they are ruling their own small kingdoms? Share those stories and let this community know they are not alone. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for HOA stories, where we reveal how the system actually functions when citizens understand how to make it work for justice instead of allowing petty despots to run rampant with fabricated authority. The evening breeze carries the sound of families laughing around lakefront fire pits, the crackle of burning cedar, and the gentle splash of fish breaking the surface of water that belongs to everyone, not just those who believe they have the right to seize it. This is what America looks like when good people refuse to let corruption prevail. Justice tastes like victory, sounds like community, and feels like returning home to a place where bullies cannot withstand the scrutiny of a federal investigation. Thank you for being here with us at End for HOA. If you enjoyed today's showdown and seeing an HOA Karen get her comeuppance, click like, sound off in the comments, and subscribe to catch next week's drama. You won't want to miss it.